Welcome, everyone, to the Stateless Atheist. So today I'm interviewing Aaron Spencer Morton, and we're going to be speaking a little bit about his experience with Mormonism, his views on religion, libertarianism, and why he's a Georgist. So,
and why you should be too.
So let's start off. We're going to start off a little bit that we did the first time. What I mean by that is, just so everybody knows, we already did this interview. It was never recorded by mistake. I'm an old man, so I forgot how to do it correctly.
Daniel's taking up.
So we're redoing this interview. But we're going to start it off a little differently this time. Aaron, start off by just giving me a brief introduction of your philosophical views of religion and politics.
In terms of religion, as you mentioned, I don't actually. Yeah, did you mention? Yeah, I was raised Mormon personally. However, as I've grown older, I've actually come to fully reject the Mormon Church for a multitude of reasons. Today, I wouldn't really call myself Mormon. I would definitely not call myself Mormon, Christian, any religion. I typically say I'm, granted, it's not the best word, apatheist. I just don't see the point in discussion of whether or not God exists. So I say apatheist as specifically anti-atheist term because I just don't see the discussion of God being a necessary subject to discuss. In terms of philosophy, I personally, as he mentioned, I consider myself a Georgist. I am when it comes to specifically more broad politics, I border between liberal and libertarian. I have I call myself a walking contradiction of politics, where I support many libertarian ideals like free markets, but I also support many liberal ideals like a social safety net, as well as free college, for example. But philosophically, I would say I teeter between liberal and libertarian, with mostly a Georgist theme on the idea that we should have a land value tax and no other taxes, and a citizen's dividend to ensure good justice goes to everyone who promotes productive activity.
Okay, so let's dig into those topics a little bit more. Let's start with the Mormon side. Tell me a little bit about your experience growing up, and give people a good introduction to what the Mormon Church is and why is it different? How is it different to the Catholic Church?
Okay, that's a good one. So my problem with the Mormon Church is I do believe it encourages a lot of choices that are often psychologically harmful. Well, not necessarily psychologically harmful, but rather repressive of certain things that we shouldn't be repressive of. The Mormon Church, encourages a mindset that with all its appeal, it does encourage certain mindset that blindly believes. Mormons, I will admit, there are some of the smartest people I met. The Mormon Church actually highly encourages education as part of its doctrine. But at the same time, it encourages a mindset of just don't question the church. Because when you get down to it, the Mormon Church has some really strange beliefs, which I'll get into as I discuss Catholicism. So the difference between the Catholic Church and the Mormon Church is arguably the Mormon Church is democratic. And I say arguably because it goes top down and then up and then bottom up. So every single leader and figure in the church is technically voted upon their constituency. So for the Mormon Church, it's structured similar to how Catholic Church is. You have the local pastor, the diocese, and et cetera, up to the Pope. In the Mormon Church, you have wards, which are individual branches, for a locality. Then you have stakes, which are all wards, and you have a region, and then the global church, run by the president of the church, the prophet. Generally what happens is the stake president nominates the bishop of the ward. And the ward members will elect, will essentially say if they approve or disapprove. But in the end, there's a very big stigma in actually disapproving. So you can say I disapprove, but it'll give you a lot of stigma. It can be very, people will question, well, why did he do that? It's granted, yeah, every single member is approved by the church, but in the end, it's a pseudo election. They are guaranteed to get in because of the stigma that comes with questioning it. they have similar styles. When it comes to members that go apostate per se, they do like remove them, but the differences there are a little different. Mormon, there's for the Mormon Church, you can get we call it excommunication. Excommunication is when you do something blasphemous or against God. It has to be, usually it has to be a big deal. It isn't, the church goes willy-nilly excommunicating people. Usually you have to say something blasphemous about the church itself. You have to do something blasphemous, like, encourage the idea the church is false. Granted, though, there are some things that they will get a bit touchy on. There are people that, have been caught, doing things that are otherwise the church disapproves of, or, they were falsely accused, but the church excommunicates them anyway. And usually if there's an excommunication in a certain ward, the church will go on a witch hunt to remove members within that ward. So there is a very big, culture of don't question the church's action that a lot of other religions don't have. Another key difference is, unlike most Christian religions, for starters, the Mormon Church believes that the God, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Ghost are three separate beings. Most Christian religions believe that they are one singular unit. I can't remember the specific term about it. And it's actually that singular point that a lot of Christians...
The Trinity.
The Trinity, yeah, the Holy Trinity. It's actually that singular thing that a lot of Christians have issues with the Mormons, and actually a lot of Christians, because of that, consider a Mormon church a cult rather than an actual Christian religion. However, that's one of the big differences. Another one is that the Mormons add an extra 3 scriptures to the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Book of Mormon, which is where the name Mormon comes from. The Pearl of Great Price, which is its own crazy book that I'll get into. And then you have the Doctrine and Covenants, which is essentially sort of the Mormon Constitution. It explains, what are the beliefs of Mormons, what should they do, what is the structure of the church, and stuff like that. It's also where you would find the ordinance that banned polygamy within the church in 1896. But those are like the overarching differences, and I'll get in the nitty-gritty as questions come along.
Okay. So what was your experiences, both good and bad, growing up as a Mormon?
Again, the good part is the Mormons have a very great community. When you are in a ward, you feel your part. Everyone in the ward, and everyone in the ward knows you. And it's a very close-knit community. And so, everyone helps everyone. Again, that's something I praise Mormons. The church does encourage a very charitable lifestyle. Despite being very Republican, they do firmly believe in the idea of charity, helping others if you can. In fact, the church has its own internal welfare system for Mormons that are not so well off. Granted, it takes a big deal to actually get church welfare, but it is there for those that are having, lost their job, are about to go, homeless and stuff like that. With that said, the issues come with, again, the beliefs, the ideology that a lot of Mormons have. That, again, it's very unquestioning. There's stigmas that come with certain things. As someone, so one of the things in the Mormon Church is it is heavily encouraged to go on a mission. One of the big things about being a Mormon male is that you need to go on a mission. A lot of people outside the Mormon Church think it's a commandment, but in fact, in the church, you do not need to go on a mission. But there is a big stigma. Again, that's the big problem with the church, is that the culture has a lot of stigmas about a whole slew of things that shouldn't have stigmas. For a lot of, the church, if you don't go on a mission, people will ask you for 4 years. In the Mormon Church, you're able to go from a mission from the age of 18 to 23. And if you don't, you constantly get bombarded with questions. Oh, when are you going on a mission, Aaron? When are you going on a mission? Have you planned to go on a mission? And it's a very stressful thing, because you're given that mindset. If you don't, you'll be
That's
shunned.
like the Jewish. When are you getting married? When are you getting married? When are you getting married?
And that's also in the Mormon Church. The Mormon Church has a very big marriage is a priority kind of mindset. Granted, they want you to go on your mission first before you get married. And so if you the second president of the Mormon Church, Brigham Young, had a very funny quote: "Any person not married by the age of 21 is a nuisance to society." I'm 23. I'll let you say tell what that means about me.
The start of all the riots is what you're telling me.
The Mormon just has a lot of stigmas behind it. Again, you don't go on your mission if you do something that there's a lot of like minor things that shouldn't be big deals, but can become an issue. And because of this, I've seen Mormons are depressed for the fact they didn't go on a mission. I had I worked with a gentleman who's Mormon who was in my ward, who made a point to me one day. He's like, I know you're questioning going on a Mormon mission, but I regretted not doing it myself. And I feel like that wouldn't be an issue if there wasn't such a big stigma. Because again, a lot of people can't go on a mission for a multitude of reasons. And again, the idea of not questioning the doctrine and, if anything out of the norm has a stigma, it gets people that are in the church, feeling bad. And they still stay in the church sort of, as, well, it's my community. I'm used to it. So that's the good and bad. The good is, again, there's a beautiful community that they're very supportive. The bad part is, again, you get a lot of stigma for certain actions that are otherwise not that bad.
So you say there's a stigma if you don't ever go.
Yeah.
How does it affect somebody's community life within the Mormon church if they never went at all and they age out?
There isn't too much, but like, there is that stigma. It's like, oh, why didn't he go on a mission? They don't ask, and him himself, and the fact that they didn't go on a mission will have their own issue. Because, again, they feel like they failed their duty as a Mormon, that they didn't help proselytize the word of God. And so to them, it is going to be a burden on them. It doesn't really affect their standing in society. There's a bunch of other things that it could do that. For someone falling out of the church, in the Mormon church, a certain lingo is anyone who falls out of the church is called a Jack Mormon. Someone who, stopped practicing. The specific stereotype is that a Jack Mormon is someone who drinks Jack Daniel's whiskey because, they no longer follow the word of wisdom. And for those that are not Mormon, the word of wisdom is a set of guidelines, of dietary guidelines for the Mormon church. That's supposed to say you can't drink coffee, tea, smoke, or drink any alcoholic products.
I just had some tea.
That is considered a sin. And so, again, there's another stigma, And again, there's a big, confession. Another problem with the church is the confessional. So I always like to joke that I would love to be raised Catholic. Because, the Catholic Church, you got that division between you and the bishop. And you say, hey, bishop, forgive me for I've sinned. Hurry up. I got a prostitute waiting for me out in 10 minutes. And, your sins are covered. But in the Mormon church, you face the bishop eye to eye. Imagine being a 15-year-old boy going through puberty and have to deal with that. That is a terrifying, stressful situation.
I was listening to The Thinking Atheist today, and he has a call-in show. Seth Andrews is his name. And he was talking to this person. The whole show, this episode, was about calling about your experiences in religious schools. He said there was a similar experience, this one person that called up, how they had to sit down every week and explain all the sins they did during the week. And he said one week, he told them, I can't think of anything I did wrong this week. They punished him so much. He said they called his mother slapped the shit out of him because they all accused him of thinking he was godly for not having any sin that one week.
That's the good thing about the Mormon church, though, is it's voluntary. Every time you go to the bishop, it's voluntary. Because that's one of the good things about the church, is that they don't have, that forced idea that you need to do it. There's no Irish guilt, as the Catholics would say. But if you do go, it's a terrifying experience. And in the Mormon church, even the littlest thing can be a big sin to them. The Mormon church famously is very anti-pornography. Half of the anti-porn ads you'll see is mostly funded by the Mormon church. And again, being a prepubescent boy, not a boy going through puberty, that is a terrifying thing. If you see a naughty on the internet and you go to your bishop and you have to confess that, you're thinking, I'm a terrible boy. What have I done? Granted, it'll vary. I had a good bishop. He tries to be supportive, but in the end, it does create, again, a lot of issues. I'm going to sound like a degenerate to any of your far-right libertarian viewers because, things that, yeah. That's another thing. I'm not necessarily left libertarian, but I do believe in a sex positive society, and the Mormon Church is heavily anti-sex, is heavily sex negative.
That's one thing I was going to ask you next. Like, what are their views on sexuality, on gender?
We're talking no masturbation, none. Or not even like to, for stress relief, not even to help something. It is banned. It's to them a sin. Like,
are you going to hell? Are you going to hell for this reason?
Well, I don't know. So here's actually the sidetrack. The Mormon Church surprisingly doesn't have a concept of heaven or hell. It's strange. So in the Mormon Church, when you die, you go to either heaven, spirit paradise, or spirit prison, which aren't as good or bad as they sound like. Essentially, spirit paradise is the good Mormon people that did the good stuff their entire life. Spirit prison is for people that didn't convert to Mormonism. It's where people were Mormon but sinned, or just general sinners go, but they have a chance to repent there.
Wow.
And essentially just a way. Essentially, I call it an airplane terminal. It's just spirit paradise is a crappy airplane terminal. And essentially, you're staying there until Jesus returns to reign on earth. Once he returns, he reigns for thousands of years. The real hell is considered outer darkness, because again, when you die and the millennium is over, everyone's sorted into three kingdoms: the celestial, terrestrial, and the telestial. And each one is like a different glory of God. Celestial is like the one where you live with God himself. You get your own planet. That's where the idea of the Mormons believe you get your own planet comes from. Is that if you're in the highest kingdom, you get your own planet to rule.
Do you become a god?
What?
You become like a god then over there?
You become a god.
Okay.
The other two kingdoms are just progressively not as glorious. The bottom one is you don't even get to meet Jesus, is how bad it is. However, there's one layer below it called outer darkness, which is where Satan lives. The idea is just pure darkness. It's pitch black for infinity. And it's where not actually sinners go. All sinners get a place in the three kingdoms. It's the people that straight up rejected God. Like they met God and rejected him to his face, is where that goes. Regardless, back to the main topic, I will likely definitely go to spirit prison. I do not believe this stuff, and I do believe that it exists. I will have an easy way, because again, going back to my ideas, God is a pointless discussion. We should be more discussing what matters to be a good person. Not, we shouldn't be basing the idea that there's an afterlife. We should be based on what can we do now to be good. And so it's actually the reason why I actually have a lot more respect of all the religions for Judaism, because I think their concept of the afterlife and sin is far better and has less of issues than most religions. Because folks, the idea to just be a good person, because you're not promised any afterlife. Just be a goddamn good person. I forgot where we. Oh yeah. So again, Mormons also believe heavily in sex after marriage. So you're not allowed to do anything outside of the sanctity of marriage, because the marriage to them is a big deal. And this is where some of the hidden underlying sexism sticks in. So in the Mormon Church historically has been famous for practicing polygamy. However, de jure today, they do not practice polygamy in any way, shape, or form. However, this is where the loophole comes in. De facto, through their beliefs, they do. So in the Mormon Church, a big deal is they get sealed in the temple. If you don't get sealed in the temple, it's a big problem to them. There's that stigma. Well, why aren't they sealed in the temple? One of them must be a sinner and stuff like that. Because in order to get in sealed in the temple, both of you have to be approved by your local bishop. So you can't be a sinner. And so you get sealed in the temple, which means in the eyes of God, you are married. And so you get married there. If you ever want a divorce, legally you'll get divorced. But in the eyes of God, you're still married. And furthermore, it's very difficult to get divorced, in the eyes of God. So you'll never be able to get sealed again. There's also very big stigma with divorce in the Mormon Church. And so in order for a divorce to happen, it has to be approved by both, unless one of them is dead. If the male is dead, then the widow has to get approval, not from just God, but her husband. She needs to know her husband approves of the divorce. However, if the wife died, the male widower doesn't need any approval. because in the Mormon Church, polygamy can only be practiced by men. And so, in the eyes of God, polygamy is still allowed. It's just in the eyes of the de facto, in the de jure practice of the church, it's banned here on earth. So you can't.
It's not allowed.
Yeah. So legally, you can't marry multiple wives, but in the eyes of God, you can, so long as the wife is dead or has divorced you legally.
I was watching another video recently, a Muslim talking about another crazy sexist marriage situation. He said that if he's an ex-Muslim, he's an atheist now, and he said if a Muslim man says throughout their marriage, no matter who it's in front of or if he meant it or anything like that, if he says I want a divorce 3 times, they are considered divorced.
Huh.
But if a woman says it, it means nothing.
Oh God, that is terrible. Jesus. Yeah. Again, that's another issue. Again, the Mormon Church, the sexism is hidden under layers of kindness. You know, surprisingly enough, in some ways, the early church was actually surprisingly very progressive in certain areas. Surprisingly enough, the Mormon Church was actually one of the first advocates for women's suffrage. Is actually an unknown fact. In fact, Utah was the first area in the United States to legalize women's suffrage. However, it was repealed 2 years later because the early Mormon Church was a clusterfuck between the Mormons and the governments. If you want a really interesting history tale, read about the Utah Wars, or as it's also known as Buchanan's Blunder. That gets a hint what happened.
Buchanan the president, right?
What?
Buchanan the president.
Yes. So in 1857, the president of the United States, James Buchanan, was worried that the Mormons were planning an uprising against the federal government. So he sent, I kid you not, 10,000 troops to put control of the Mormons. And what resulted was a guerrilla tactic warfare by the Mormons against the federal troops, and they lost. The federal troops absolutely lost. And so eventually what came down is the federal government, okay, look, just recognize our rule. Just say you recognize us as the government of Utah, and we don't care what else you do. That was it, because it was just such a momentous blunder on the federal government. They failed horribly. It sadly peaked in what's called the Meadows Valley Massacre. The Mormon Church up-down denies involvement, but in 1858, a band of 10 Mormons disguised themselves as Indians and massacred a wagon train of 100 people. The president of the church, Brigham Young, swear to God that he didn't do anything, but he didn't say it was a bad thing, and he was totally not inciting anything. He intentionally made it sound like he wasn't trying to incite anything, even though he did secretly approve of what happened. And he did do a couple things to incite it. Regardless, that was the end of the war, as both sides agreed that something needs to be done. And so the federal government said, okay, we're done. Just don't do anything stupid. The early Mormon Church and the history of Utah is insanely crazy. There's so many strange things about it. And that's the thing I love about as much as I do not care about the Mormon Church, the early history of the church is absolutely something everyone should read because it's so strange. Because in the end, if I were to tell someone who doesn't know anything about the church and explain them the beliefs of the Mormon Church, they will full-heartedly believe that is an American religion. Because everything about it screams religion. It screams American in so many ways. It's very, on its own, individualistic, and it's absurd in the end if you read the early Mormon history. In fact, the early Mormon history is the reason why a lot of Mormons are oddly one of the few conservatives that support bringing refugees. The early Mormon Church, the early Mormons were refugees in their own part. They were kicked out state by state. In fact, it got so bad in Missouri that the Missouri governor passed a law called the Mormon Extermination Act that wasn't repealed until 1972, which shows, the religion, because Mormons were not a respected religion until very recently. Again, they were seen as that strange cult nonsense in the middle of Utah that practiced polygamy on that. In fact, the Republican Party, strange enough, was founded on a very explicitly anti-Mormon plank. They believed that polygamy was a barbaric action Granted, they didn't do anything until Grant was president. But Lincoln, since he had a Civil War dealt with, essentially sent a letter to the church saying, look, don't screw with me, I don't screw with you. Because, he had a bigger fist cry. But the Republicans hated the Mormons. From the history between, 1870 to 1892 was just persecution by persecution. And again, it shows, how hatred and, oppression happens. And what happens in reverse, because again, now the Mormons are considered a very important part of American society. Even though many in the South and many other fanatical evangelicals would consider Mormonism a massive cult. And we started for going on that massive tangent.
Yeah. So, explain to the viewers about the underwear and how they stop bullets. I'm kidding about the second part partially.
So yes, the magic underwear is not magic per se. So the idea of the magic underwear is that when you get sealed in the temple, you get a set of temple garments, which is the magic underwear. And the idea is if you wear them, it's supposed to give you blessings from God. It's supposed to remind you of your covenant with God, as well as, give you blessings to ensure that you do better and do good and follow Mormon doctrine. They're not magic, they don't stop bullets, although some Mormons do believe that, but they're like, I've never met one, and they're just a very extreme sect of the church. But for the most part, it's just the idea it's supposed to remind you of your covenant of God, and if you wear them, give them a blessing. It's also to encourage modesty, because they absolutely look ridiculous. Because the idea is it covers, these garments cover your entire body. So if you wear anything too revealing, they will be shown. So the idea is that you're supposed to wear them all the time. It encourages you to dress in modesty. No shoulders, kind of deal.
So, has your experience with let me ask this other question before I go there. What's the craziest or say funniest experience that you had with the Mormon Church growing up?
I don't know what to say. The Mormons, as a lot of people might know, the Mormon Church used to be one of the biggest funders of Boy Scouts. However, in the past decade, the decision to defund the Boy Scouts wasn't actually because of the trans right. It was actually a gradual process. The Mormon Church, as early as 2010, was slowly shifting towards their own model of Boy Scouts that is more religious focused. I was a proud member of the Boy Scouts. I actually have a Life Scout ranking. I almost got an Eagle, but that was right after they shifted towards more religious activities for the Boy Scouts. So I never managed to get the couple merit badges I needed to get Eagle. And so I'm still pissed off about that to this day, that I wasn't able to get my Eagle because they never focused on merit badges that I needed to get. And they were not merit badges I could have done on my own. I needed help to get them.
I was a Boy Scout also.
Good. Always glad to see another Boy Scout. Again, I'd always mention, I find their views on masturbation pornography absolutely insanely strict. And it's hilarious how they'll go out of their ways to make you feel like a sinner. I remember, so a tradition amongst Mormons is that when you get to high school, you go to something called seminary, which is torture because you have to wake up at 5 a.m. to go to a class before school that isn't required for your school at 6 a.m. And each year you go over a separate portion of the doctrine of the church. 1 year it's the Old Testament, next year it's the New Testament, 1 year it's the Book of Mormon, 1 year it's Doctrine of the Covenant. And I remember just one lesson, they were railing on masturbation in the lesson. I can't remember how it got up. And I was sitting there as somebody who just looked at something the day before, just stressing oh God. Again, the more hilarious part just comes from their beliefs. For example, the Mormons firmly believe that all Native Americans are Jewish. I'm not even kidding. Part of their beliefs is the idea that in 500 BC, a prophet by the name of Lehi was commanded by God to take his family and escape Jerusalem right before the invasion of the Babylonians. What proceeded that they trekked I'm not sure where they traveled. I think it suggests they traveled across Asia to where they were then commanded to build a boat to sail across the dang Pacific, where they landed in Central America.
Don't they believe Jesus came with them for a minute? Like Jesus visited the United States? So
yeah. So when Jesus crucified, the 3 days he was crucified, he actually visited the Americans, the Native Americans, where he established his church there as well. He like chose 12 apostles and all that, and he established it in America, and then left after 3 days. Again, they believe in really strange stuff. I mentioned something called the Pearl Grey Price. So what the Pearl Grey Price is, in 1835, an Egyptologist brought manuscripts from Egypt. And this is before they translated the Rosetta Stone, so he had no idea how to translate them. So while in America, he heard rumors of this American who had glasses. Well, actually, if you've seen South Park, you know what I'm talking about, so I'm not going to explain it. What?
the seer stones.
The seer stones, or as they are actually called in the Mormon Church, the Urim and Thummim. I butchered the pronunciation, I think. It's been so long since I mentioned them. But he heard this. And so he decided, well, I have no other way to translate, so we take them. So Joseph Smith took the opportunity to translate them. And so what he claimed they were is that they were a extra chapter for the book of Moses and Exodus in the Bible, and a new lost chapter involving Abraham, the ancient Israelite prophet. And the idea is that like each one has a separate symbol, and he translated. One was a picture of Abraham sacrificing his son, and the other one I can't remember what it was. I think it involved Moses. It was just this wacky idea that it's telling a lost thing lost to the Bible in time, and that was like considered doctrine. Until 100 years later, in 1976, a group of Egyptologists actually decided, you know what, let's look at these. And they found out, wait, these have nothing to do with Abraham and Moses. These are actually just generic sacrificial diagrams used in what they do for mummification. The Mormon Church buried that immediately and said nothing about it. They never commentaried on it again after. In fact, if you look at the Book of Mormon, I sadly don't have the Book of Mormon on me. They still have the two manuscripts in there, the two diagrams, where they drew in their own version of what it's supposed to be. Yeah, the Book of Moses diagram is actually the vision. So to the Mormons, God is literally alien. He lives on the planet a planet called Kolob.
It's starting to sound a lot like Scientology.
The only difference is we don't go batshit crazy when someone leaves the church. Instead, we annoy them for the rest of their lives. At least with Scientology, we don't intentionally hunt down someone. And in the Mormon Church, we say, hey, I see you moved to our ward. You haven't been to church recently. You want to come back? We're not forceful about it. The Scientologists will just go crazy. Again, the Mormon Church, again, does have its problems. But in some ways, it's better. In some ways, it isn't. And the ways it's better is that at least when people leave, they try to be understanding. It's only when they're excommunicated that there is definitely a stigma, which in their beliefs makes sense. But, if someone leaves, they understand and don't try to go after them. Yeah.
So, has your experience with the Mormon Church in any way affected your political views?
I tell you what, I was a strong head-first, dang strong conservative when I was young. I was, again, I questioned gay marriage. I definitely didn't agree with it. I was definitely a very hardline conservative. It wasn't until in high school that I started doing my own research, that I started dabbling in different beliefs. I like to call that I've been every belief under the sun except fascist. Throughout high school, granted through high school, I went through more of a edgy phase where I wanted to be something different from my parents. I dabbled in communism.
You're going to be fascist?
Hmm?
Maybe next year you're going to be fascist?
No, never. Thank God, never. I've been communist. I've been an anarchist. I've been an ANCAP. I've been everything under the sun except fascist, which I'm proud of. I would argue that was me trying to go against my Mormon beliefs. I've been having an anti-Mormon bent since I was 15. Granted, it was strange. I was anti-Mormon, but also pro-Mormon, where I still believed the church, but did everything to be against the church. It wasn't until I was actually 19 that I finally recognized that no, I'm not Mormon.
Like a contrarian almost, you are.
Yeah, my high school I was a massive contrarian. And I was one of those annoying libertarian contrarians as well that flat out said, we should get rid of social security. What about old people? Screw them. No joke. I said that in an AP government class when I was debating my teacher. He said, what about old people? I straight said, well, fuck them. I was so stupid in high school.
So how did you start to progress from your conservative views to your libertarian views?
It was a process. I would say my first introduction to libertarianism was through my brother. My brother was gay, and that was actually a big issue in our family that he was gay, but it's something that our families come reconcile. My mom has a policy of, hate the sin but love the sinner, which I personally think is bullshit. I think that's actually still encourages the homophobic mindset. Not saying I don't love you, Mom. I love you, Mom, I swear. If you ever see this, forgive everything I've said. But regardless,
3 weeks, Aaron gets kicked out of his house.
my mom, I have despite the fact I'm anti-Mormon, my family essentially adopted a don't ask, don't tell policy. We don't ask anything about beliefs. We don't do anything about beliefs. If I want to go to church, I'll go to church. We recognize that. With my cousins, although my cousins are more prodding, and I've developed the art of the politician's runaround, where, hey, everyone, you're going to mission. Well, maybe, I don't know. I think about it occasionally, but maybe. I always found a runaround. But regardless, my transition was essentially just, again, the country. But my first thing that got me was sadly Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand was what made me libertarian. I'll say this, I think The Fountainhead is a great book, despite Ayn Rand's sex fantasy she puts in there. I'm still scarred by that chapter. It's a good book. I recommend The Fountainhead. I also recommend Anthem. I never, ever want to recommend Atlas Shrugged and torture someone like that. I personally couldn't make it past 100 pages. And I actually have a friend who says that he read Atlas Shrugged to punish Ayn Rand because he made it 100 pages in, and he felt that if he didn't finish the book, he would let Ayn Rand win. So he had to finish it to beat Ayn Rand.
It's actually more popular than The Fountainhead.
Which makes me sad, because I think The Fountainhead has more broad appeal. Because, it's more, Atlas Shrugged is a dick slap to the face. It's Ayn Rand, you're going to accept objectivism or not. With Fountainhead, she's more appealing, at least. It doesn't from wealthy. It comes from the voice of someone who wants to try to be different, even though the sex fantasies. I'm doing that as a hint to read it to find out what I mean, because it gets freaky. Ayn Rand has very interesting preferences, to say the least. But The Fountainhead's a good book. It's an enjoyable book, and it has very good lines. It doesn't have the 60-page monologues that Atlas Shrugged has. So I recommend Fountainhead. It's a decent book. Granted, if you want Atlas Shrugged, I personally recommend The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. It essentially has the same ideas, minus the 60-page monologues, and is actually enjoyable. Anything by Robert A. Heinlein is brilliant anyway. But regardless, it was Ayn Rand that got me on the path of libertarianism. I was vaguely knew about it through my brother Neil. And then I got into Ayn Rand, and that's what started. I then discovered Rothbard, and so from the age of like 18 to 20, more like 18, 19, I was like that alt cap kind of guy that believed in heavy property rights and all that. That was what really got me started in the process. Granted, today I'm no longer that way. It was more edutarian. I didn't really understand what I was saying. And so, but that was that process. It was getting introduced to Ayn Rand and actually reading her work that I actually got slowly interested in libertarianism. My first libertarian podcaster I watched was Julie Borowski, and I shed a tear seeing how far she's fallen from those good old days.
Same with me.
Yeah. Anyway, but yeah. I think that's what got me on the path of libertarianism.
So then you moved now. You said you don't consider yourself technically a left libertarian, but you have maybe some left libertarian views. Can you explain a little bit more broadly on how your views work within the libertarian tradition?
So I firmly believe in free markets. I am a firm advocate for, the idea that, private enterprise is a brilliant thing. It works, it distributes resources. Uh, and so I believe in, the idea of, liberty. Everyone should have the right to live, as they so please. Uh, when it comes to, I agree with right libertarians. I'm okay with corporations. I'm okay with private ownership of means of production. When it comes to left libertarians, I don't mind if the workers own the means of production. Personally, I think the discussion of who owns the means of production is actually moot and ignores the actual discussion that people are trying to have when they have that discussion, which is rather what institutions should we have, rather than you talking about, well, who owns it? Well, it doesn't matter who owns it. And so firmly, I believe in the idea that we should set up the ideal system, free, we should allow what we agree, because left libertarians and right libertarians agree in the end. Granted, on the more fringe left libertarians, you definitely get the closeted tankies that should literally leave the movement, please. But most left libertarians I met are free market capitalists that just believe the workers should be the ones in charge of the companies. I'm probably going to get shot for calling them capitalists, but still. And because of the fact they both agree with free markets, and the idea is that we should set up a free market system, truly free from, the rule of government, and then whatever works, it will tend towards that, the ideal system. And in turn, granted, I'm more statist than most libertarians. I do believe in land value tax, but I believe a land value tax is necessary for liberty. We, as the orally classical liberals all firmly believe that land was not something to be owned. John Locke, quoted the Bible mentioning that, ownership of land is against God's wishes, and so we shouldn't own it. And that he mentioned that both, if you believe in the religious argument for land ownership, then it's a sin against God. But on a more, rights based, if you own land, then you're removing everyone else, lowering everyone's ability to live, because now there's less land to exist on. We need
Lockean proviso.
Yeah. We need land to exist. It's what we live on. It's what we produce on. It's what we need. And so if, people own it, if the entire planet was owned, which it is, through either government or corporations, then your rights are limited by that fact that you can't go to where you need to go. Granted, it might be, very broad, and that's the reason why I believe land rights aren't as, extensively debated, because we don't think of that extreme, because we're not at that extreme just yet. It's not like the days of feudalism where, it got to the point that, the serfs were tied to their land. But going forward, Thomas Jefferson, the great, so many classical liberals praise Thomas Jefferson, but he straight up said that anywhere where land is being owned but not utilized, the rights of land ownership has gone so far to infringe on natural rights. Adam Smith, mentioned that landlords are a parasite to society, that their interests are not in line with the rest of society. And so in the end, I firmly believe that the capitalists and the laborer are allies in everything. The capitalist needs the laborer to, make their capital work, and the laborer wants the capitalist in order to be able to produce more. And so both need each other. It's when land ownership comes to the mixture that the capitalist actually gets their power. If the capitalist couldn't control where you work, then you can go wherever you want. If the land was an issue, you can work where you want, and so capitalists have to compete with each other. But so long as land is owned, that capitalists can just sit on it as they want, or they can choose how much is produced on it, rather than doing what's optimal, they control where people can work. And so I believe, again, as Henry George said, Georgists don't believe we should ban capitalists. Capitalists are a good part of society. They are productive members. It's when they own land the issue. So the issue is not to redistribute land or confiscate property. It's to simply remove the benefits that come from it, remove the rent that is produced by it, or rather stolen by it, since rent is stolen. That isn't to say the rent is theft. I follow the true classical and economic definition of rent, which is the monetary value that land gains, not the broad-based, a lot of left libertarians will use that all rent is theft. If I rent out a home, the portion that comes from the building where I maintain the building is rightfully mine. I maintain the building. It's the portion of the rent that comes from the fact that you need to live there, so you're paying a premium to live there. That is the theft. And so the land value tax acts as a way to take away that rent and ensure that not only are people actually getting what they are collecting what they deserve, they aren't getting what they don't deserve. and what is being produced. Because again, Georgists believe that, the value of land comes from the productive ability of the society around us. So all of society helped create that value of land. And so if they are collecting it, that portion of the land value, that portion of the rent that is land of the bill, that's another problem. I'm sorry, I'm being a bit confusing with my terms here. I should say the total rent of the property, the portion that comes from land, should be given to society for the purpose of society. Granted, that's where a lot of diversity comes in Georgism. Georgism ultimately is I call it an adjective ideology. Itself isn't really an ideology. But it can be applied to any ideology. Leftists will say, well, we can use that to fund free healthcare. We can use it to fund all these programs. The right wingers might see it as a way to ensure that that people are actually getting their just production. Because the conservatives are so big on the idea everyone should produce. Well, we should also ensure that no one gets what they don't produce. So that's ultimately where Georgists line up with libertarians, that we believe everyone has the right. Natural rights, and land is an infringement on that in our views because of the fact that you need land to live. Henry George said it that the right to land is just as assured as the right to a man to breathe. We need land to live, and if you constrict where we can live, you're just as doing similar as killing a man through strangulation. Granted, it is of course an extreme analogy. I recognize that. But yeah, I'll stop rambling about that and go on to the next question.
Hey, so you said you're now a Georgist. Can you just sum that up in a quick sucking it definition for people so they know what Georgism is?
Georgism is the belief that no one should have privilege or monopoly over others. And then the best way to solve that is remove all taxes and just tax land, or as we consider land, the mother of all monopoly. That's essentially it. That we want that the greatest problems in society come from economic privileges that are given to a certain class of people, and that we need to remove those. And first and foremost, the best way is to start with taxing just land.
Explain quickly, how would taxing of land look different than taxing of property?
So I get a lot of people, whenever I say we need to tax land, people immediately assume a property tax. And although I do consider them cousins, and I do actually believe a property tax is superior to other taxes, it does have differences. So the difference between a land value tax and a property tax is the property tax includes both the land value and the building value. With a land value tax, we want to take the property value of that lot, remove the building, and just tax what the location itself is worth. And so because of that, land is a very interesting economic factor in that, unlike other assets, it's perfectly inelastic. There will never be more land. There will never be less land. There will always be as much land that exists now. And I should mention that in economics, land means all natural resources and locations. So this includes the ocean, if we ever end up building cities on the ocean. And so the difference comes from the fact that if we tax, say, property, if a property owner is taxed, they can actually end up changing their supply in reaction. Well, if I'm getting taxed, I can just restrict my supply so I don't get taxed on that. With a land value tax, you can't restrict that supply that justifies your rent. Well, some people argue, well, can't they just increase rent anyway to subsidize the tax? Well, they could. But taxes as are now are already optimized. As rent is already paid now, is already optimized. So if they were to try to charge rent, well, they can't change the supply to justify the increase. So because of that, renters will end up just using what they're renting even more, extensive. So, a group of people, a apartment rented by 2 people will now maybe bring in a 3rd people to cover the increase, which means less properties are being rented out, which means they end up losing potential revenue coming from previous now unrented lots or unrented apartments. So it ends up just going back to the original rent to increase the use. So sure, landlords could arguably increase the rent, but it wouldn't be optimal in profit terms. Because of the fact that they did that, people just end up extensively using it. And that's where the key difference comes from. I sadly can't explain it too well as I wish I could. But that's definitely the difference between the two, is that the reason why, and in the end, if you do that, That means now landowners that are sitting on empty plots of land or underutilized land now have a encouragement to do more with it. If you're sitting on a plot of land and you're now being taxed for it, you're losing revenue constantly. And, it's not like, with a property tax, you can just lower your supply to cover it. With land value tax, there's no way to cover it because it's just coming from the land value tax. And so it encourages people to use it more. If you're underutilizing property, let's say you're refusing to rent out a couple lots or buildings on your property, you're now encouraged to cover the tax by renting them out. And I realize that I actually maybe sound confusing. I'm trying to think of a better way to describe that. But in the end, with a property tax, you can just lower, just sit on the property tax to diminish the value of your property. Or increase the amount. I'm tongue-tied right now. I forgot where I'm going. I'm sorry.
Okay.
But regardless, in the end, a land value tax would encourage more productive use by the fact that there's no way to cover the cost. And so landowners will want to use more of it. So that means we'll have more buildings that will actually decrease rent. We'll have more commercial locations, industry, because which means more jobs. So everyone does better. And let's remember that the capitalist is not always himself a landlord. A mom and pop store on the corner of your home main street is are capitalists, and they're renting out that property. So now that if rent goes down, they're no longer paying a premium for land that they need to open that store. So now they're going to hire more workers. And so in the end, that's where this justice comes from. It removes one of the biggest forms of monopoly that are just under our noses. Granted, I do recognize in the modern day, Georgism may be outdated with its focus on land value tax, even though I do believe in today's world, a land value tax is even more important. I do argue that there's other forms of monopoly that we need to worry about, especially patent laws and copyrights. But to this day, a land value tax would do so much to help bring justice.
It reminds me a little bit of, I don't know if you know Benjamin Tucker and his four monopolies.
I do know, I vaguely remember, but I know that it's definitely influenced by Henry George in many ways. But what were the four?
Land was one of them. Money. It was land, money. What are the other two? Intellectual property. And I forget what the fourth one was. I can look it up.
Land, patents, and copyrights. It's probably something that has to do with like police violence or something like that.
Money monopoly, land monopoly, tariffs.
Oh yeah, which by the way, Henry George was the biggest advocate for free trade. His book, Protection of Free Trade, has been contributed to ending protectionism in America. It was that influential. Milton Friedman called Protection of Free Trade by Henry George the greatest argument for free trade ever written. And I recommend reading it. It's a short read. It's like 150 pages, and it's brilliant. Like, if you don't want to read, if you don't agree with Henry George's views on land value tax, but you want a good read anyway, Protection of Free Trade definitely shows how beautiful a writer Henry George is, and shows that he knows what he's talking about at least. It's a great read. It's humorous at times. It's very insightful. It analyzes, the impacts of free trade on everyone in society. It's a great book. I wholly recommend it.
So, for the people who've never heard of Henry George before, can you explain who he was a little bit?
Henry George is the greatest American you'd never heard. So Henry George was a late 19th century economist who in 1879 wrote the book Progress in Poverty. He wrote it. He never expected to become a big hit. Within 2 years, it sold 3 million copies globally. He was immediately like a household name. Everyone in America knew who he was when he was alive. And Progress in Poverty essentially is what I was talking about. Progress in Poverty is a brilliant scientific analysis of the causes of poverty. And it's one of the few books I actually read the intro, and it's so well written. Because in the intro, he basically asked the question, why is it in a society of so much wealth, where we have machines that are producing ungodly amounts of wealth, where we can have a sheep slaughtered, we can have a sheep exported from New Zealand, imported in California, slaughtered and on my plate in a week. And yet, people still are in poverty. You know, in a society where everyone otherwise shouldn't be in poverty, why does it keep persisting? And so that's the analyst of the book. The first three parts of the book are looking at different explanations. The first part is a beautiful critique of Malthus that I love. It's hilarious and a brilliant beatdown of why Malthus is wrong. The second chapter looks at, you know, where the origin of wages. Actually, it was that part of the book that actually convinced me that free college is a good idea, and it's a great book that discusses where wages come from. The third, and then he finally gets in land value tax, why it works, and why it's necessary for justice. But if you don't want to read those two parts, I wholly recommend reading part 10 of Parts of Poverty. It's 100 pages, and it's actually different from the rest of the book because it's not economics at all. It's more about political science and sociology, where he analyzes what happens to a society that experiences massive inequality and inequity, and how does it change that society. And it's a brilliant book where he gives his own explanation of the rise and fall of civilizations that doesn't have the same fatalistic issues that Marx has. It gives a good argument of what happens. And it's a brilliant part. If you just read that part of the book, if you want to like skip the land value tax, it's a brilliant argument of why inequality is an issue. Granted, Henry George is more against inequity, but inequality and inequity are always, you know, used interchangeably. But it's a great book. And from there, he exploded. He was so well known. Like, we're talking, he did speaking tours around the globe. He was famous in Ireland. So well known that the Catholic Church was worried. And not only did they excommunicate a bishop in New York City for advocating Georgism, they put Protestant Poverty on a blacklist of heretical books. I'm not even joking. It was on there for 10 years. Sadly, Henry George died young at 57 from a stroke. And his influence in America just dwindled from there. His influence carried on in Britain for another couple decades. Australia and New Zealand, it carried on for another 3. But throughout history since he was alive, he's influenced great minds. He was a big influence on Leo Tolstoy, who while having a heart attack, dying of a heart attack on a train, straight up for 3 straight hours said, yeah, read Henry George. I know I'm dying of a heart attack, just read Henry George. Albert Einstein called him one of the most well-written intellectuals ever. He influenced minds from Churchill to FDR. Churchill, like, straight up said that Henry George was one of the greatest economists and was heavily influenced by him, and advocated heavily for a land value tax in Britain and hated the Lords fighting against it. He influenced the founder of the Republic of China. Dr. Sun Yat-sen was a big Georgist, and the land value tax was part of one of his big 3 reforms for China. So again, he's one of the most well-known Americans you've never heard of, and his influence is far-reaching. In the end, if there's one thing you know that he changed, he actually essentially is the reason why we have secret voting in America. You know, up till the 1880s, it was widespread that people know who you voted for. Someone can watch who you voted for. Henry George hated that and campaigned relentlessly to end non-secret ballots. And actually, it was because of him. A lot of historians contribute him for the reason why we can vote and not worry about it being known to anyone else.
That actually reminds me a little bit of, politicians. We could look up what they voted for. Mm-hmm. And most people think that's actually a good thing because then we can hold them accountable for the bad things. But I actually read a report that it's actually bad in another way because of the corporations that pay them off also know.
That's actually a good point. Interesting enough, there is actually Switzerland has a very interesting system. Their executive office is split between 6 members. So they don't have one president. They actually have 6 that alternate roles between each other. And they vote on certain actions. And it's actually a secret vote in Switzerland. That any vote they make is completely secret. The only thing people know is how much was voted for what, but they don't know who voted for it. So I do think there can be argument for certain cases. Germany, their election for president is done entirely by the Bundestag and the Bundesrat. And who they vote for president and chancellor is entirely secret. The chancellor and So I do think there could be some merits to that. But ultimately, yeah, Henry George was a very big advocate for secret ballots. And that's one of the things that people at least know today.
So what is, if you wanted to sum up what you want people to take from this conversation in like a 2 to 3 minute quick blurb, what would you say?
In the end, I firmly believe that the three greatest virtues out there is liberty, justice, and democracy. That everyone should have the freedom to move, the freedom to trade, the freedom to produce what they want, to live the way they want. We need to ensure justice, to make sure that not only are criminals tried and done for punishments, but that everyone has. But the justice is given to those that are less privileged. I will say this proudly: Black Lives Matter. And one of my firm beliefs, again, they need that justice. They need to be, justice is not true until everyone is treated equally in society. And I finally, again, this is going to be more of my less libertarian side. I'm a firm believer in democracy. I firmly believe that, that the best states are those which are elected for the people, of the people, and by the people. That, we need that ensures that not only is there competition between ideals, and granted, America is definitely not the best example, but when democracy works, it ends up making sure that everyone has their voice in a competitive way to show if your ideas work, it should have mass appeal. And so those are my three big virtues: liberty, justice, and democracy. I firmly believe in the idea, again, that everyone should live the way they want without judgment, to ensure that they are given their just due and they're equal with each other. And so that's ultimately my viewpoint. And I think those are the three things that people should take from me, is that, those are very important. And it's not something you should forget. And even democracy, it doesn't just extend from voting. It includes, protest. It includes, showing your voice and stuff like that. Those are very important values that we need to hold dear. And we shouldn't allow any orange man, Oompa Loompa, in the president's office telling us what is right or wrong for protest.
Have you ever read the Don Lavoie, what is it, Radical Democracy paper, or whatever it's called?
I actually think I did. I can't remember, though. I remember...
Markets in the Legal Order.
Huh?
The name, I just looked it up. Democracy, Markets, and the Legal Order.
I don't think I've read it. I can't... I don't remember.
It's actually it's more broad than just, like you were saying, voting. He talks more about democracy should be more about the principles of working together, almost like.
Yeah. We need to work together. Granted, I do not agree with riots. I do not believe in violent protesting. We've discussed this. We both agree on this, that violent protests are mostly ineffective. They can affect change, and I will not deny that the riots that we've seen have helped create some change. But in the end, they rarely do that and can often backfire. But to quote my MLK, like all those other anti-rioters like to do, Martin Luther King did say that riots are the voice of the unheard. And when people riot, it isn't because they want to destroy things. It's because they have no other option in their mind but to violently attack the system that puts them down. But, I say this, I actually do firmly believe this. I believe, and it's something I should point out, I do believe that riots work. That's a scary thing about democracy. That if it takes violent action to enact change, then democracy itself is pointless, because it means that peaceful change can never happen unless might is right. That we need that violent change. And so democracy itself is pointless value, because if it takes force, violent force, to make the change in the world, then there's no point in peaceful change, because that means that, why should we work together when I can just force you to give my change? That's what democracy is about, though, is the idea that working together peacefully for that change in the end. And so that's another reason why I oppose violent protests, is because if it does work better than peaceful, that's a scary notion in my mind. Granted, that might be a very unscientific, very biased viewpoint, but that's ultimately my fear when it comes to riots.
So I want to close up with, can you give me 3 to 5 sources of things you think people should read or watch that will help get them in to understand your view of the world or on economics, philosophy?
Yeah. First one is going to, I'll just lump it all together. Anything by Henry George, specifically Progress of Poverty and Social Problems. If you're more economically or right-winged, you'll probably like Progress of Poverty more since it goes from more a economics tinge. If you're more liberal and more sociological leaning, you're going to like Social Problems, where Henry George more analyzes the issue of inequality and poverty and the impacts it has and why justice is necessary from a sociological standpoint. The second one I'm going to recommend is, this is going to be a hard one now. Philosophically, I'm going to throw in a fiction book. I'm going to say Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. That was a big impact on my viewpoint. It really made me believe in the idea, the true way to be happy is just accept the fact the universe is random. There doesn't need to be an afterlife. There doesn't need to be a God. It's all random, but that isn't a bad thing. And we just embrace it. And lastly, in honor of one of my favorite bands in Neil Peart, I'm just going to say, listen to all of Rush. The discography of Rush has a lot of brilliant philosophical meanings. Rush, interesting fact, was one of the first bands to come out in support of the gay community in the early 90s during the AIDS crisis. They wrote a song specifically talking about Neil Peart's experience with a friend who he lost to the AIDS epidemic and how he doesn't understand how people can hate the gay community when they're just humans on their own. Neil Peart is a brilliant philosopher. He does it in his music. 2112 is a brilliant song for any Ayn Rand fan. So is Anthem. If you want a really good, strong, anti-authoritarian, racist thing, Vital Signs and Alien Shore is really good. No, not Vital Signs. Witch Trial is really good for the song because it talks about how fear of other people and other things can blind us and can end up submitting us to an authoritarian. Alien Shore is about how race and sex doesn't make us any different and why should it? So those are my three. I'm going to say specifically Social Problems, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and the discography of Rush.
Thank you very much, Aaron. It was a pleasure to talk to you. If we have any more questions or anything like that, we'll have another conversation.
By the way, like and follow Gorgeous Georges Memes on Facebook. I have to shill for that. Brilliant memes. Anyway, I'll let you go.
Thank you. Have a good day. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. Please like and subscribe. I'll see you soon.